Great. Thanks very much for attending this morning's session. As you can see from the bottom of my camera, my name is Bruce Macgregor. Just very shortly, my background is an interesting background. I grew up in the rural areas in KZN and was fortunate to learn to speak Zulu fluently, to read and write it at school. So when it came time to become an article clerk, I applied with Ray Zondo from the Zondo Commission, and who's now the Chief Justice. And I was very privileged for 3.5 years to be trained by him. Pretty much I attribute a lot of the things, and I think I've been quite successful to him and the style that he taught. And that style is important because in this morning's session, I'm going to take you through a couple of solutions to the problems we're facing now, and that is partly linked to that style. And if I had to summarize in a nutshell that style, that is a style where it's characterized by very high levels of communication and trying to break down barriers. And as simple as that might sound, that is, for me, 80% of the problems that we're facing in South Africa at the moment. So what I do is I started in 2008. I came from one of the big commercial law firms, started a business in 2008 with a partner, and that business has grown quite big. We've got 3 offices throughout South Africa. That's Macgregor Erasmus. We do work into all the SADC countries for our clients, and into Africa in specific countries where they have disputes. One of the things that I did in 2007 was I got admitted as an English solicitor because a lot of those disputes are dealt with in terms of the English law of contract or the English or the laws of England and Wales in terms of employment statutes. I also moved between South Africa and England and have a fair idea, funny enough, because I live and work in both environments, as to what's going on from a macro point of view, because I keep an eye on what's going on in other countries. So the reason the topic that I chose today was really the looking at this racing inflation rate. And I've been inundated, our firm's been inundated for I'd say about post-COVID, so about a year in just retrenchment after retrenchment after retrenchment, which is problematic. The statistics tell us each South African employee employs somewhere between 6.5 to 7 dependents. So that's if you dismiss or retrench 10 employees, there's 60 to 70 dependents now that don't have a source of support. So retrenchments I've always not liked generally because they're often a quick fix. And where the economy grows down the line, a year later, I ask, what's happening? And I'm told, oh, well, we've replaced staff, etc., etc. Now, where we are is different now, because there's obviously 2 things happening. Within South Africa, we've got problems which start with government, start with service delivery. And if some of you have been to my talks about 2 or 3 years ago, I'd noticed the trend in communities objecting, communities raising concerns and about the lack of service delivery. And these have crept up. So the police record them as I think they call them strike days for some reason, but they're not strikes, they're just service delivery protests. And they've literally gone up over 10 years from 500 to 1,000 to a couple of thousand to 4,000 or 5,000 a year. So services aren't being delivered. We've obviously got serious problems in government, the Zondo Commission, and our media is full of corruption. I remember there was a statistic going around about a year ago where they just had a look at the identifiable corruption and worked out that all the money that was taken could simply have been given to every man, woman, and child in South Africa, and everyone would have got R1 million. So it's on a massive scale. And where we are at the moment is a country where we're not having our infrastructure maintained. So we've got problems with water, even prior floods. We've our water utilities, all our pipes need replacing at a massive cost and haven't been done. That's been exacerbated by the strikes. We've got, as you saw yesterday, load shedding stage 6. So in some parts of KZN, I've got clients who've got 12 hours of no electricity and 13 hours of no water. We've obviously got issues with our roads. We've got issues with our bridges. So there's serious issues that are facing us. Now, to make that worse, what's happening internationally is there's a recession which has obviously started, and it's been exacerbated now with what's going on in Ukraine, and certainly there's a hell of a lot of things going on there that are quite worrying. In the whole Russia-China space, the whole Russia-China-India space, and there's a new power block that seems to be created. So in the future, we've got some issues. So if I sit back, I've been called in, as I do a lot of employment law. That's the bulk of what I do, and on a couple of occasions I've been pulled in to sit as a labour court judge. I've been sitting on labour court, on wage negotiations recently, because I've got good relations with many unions, having cut my teeth doing union employment work in the first sort of 5-6 years of my practice, and speaking Zulu, and having an approach which I mentioned right in the beginning with Zondo, and that is approach to communicate well, to talk and get to the bottom of the problem and put aside our pride and all of those issues. So at the current wage negotiations, we're sitting, I just had a look, the figures, the first set of figures came out yesterday, officially 6.5% inflation rate. I don't understand that, and I think it may be understated, because if I have a look at what we're experiencing, so fuel's gone up this year to date 32%. I just pulled off some of the common ones. Electricity at 14%, public transport 12%, meat 9%, almost 10%, bread 8%, and alcohol between 7 and 8%. Now, with all of those running as they are, your inflation rate by the end of the year, seeing that we've got a couple, I would think 2 or 3 more rate hikes coming up, we're going to be well over 10, which is problematic. So we certainly know that we're in for some difficult times as consumers, because at the end of the day, manufacturers ultimately can't bear these costs, and they need to pass them on to the consumer. The consumers are trapped. We've got obviously very little savings. So it's just generally a very grim time. And if things escalate in Russia and Ukraine with NATO, then certainly they're going to become tighter. So that's the issue. That's the problem. Nothing of this is a surprise. What I like to do in all cases that I do, so whether it's a CCMA case, a labour court case, wage negotiations, a restructuring, is at the end of it, sit down and work out, gee, how could we have done this better? And as I'm sure you all know, you end up at the end of a CCMA case, and if you take the time and look back, you'll find some point where things went wrong, a relationship broke down, or the person who was recruited incorrectly. So hindsight can, in that instance, be a good teacher. Now, where we are now is the first reaction I get is, Bruce, we're battling, we need to cut and reduce the workforce. And I go along, and the LRA says, well, before you do that, let's look at alternatives. So in the past, it was other jobs. It was looking at retirees going first, reducing temporary employment services or fixed termers. Now at the moment, because we cannot, just from a social and moral point of view, just allow the amount of dismissals to take place, bearing in mind officially we're well over 50% unemployment, that unemployment is in the bracket of 18 to 27-year-olds. And that's historically, so if you look at all major political revolutions and changes in the world, that is the group. If that group is unhappy and that group doesn't feel that it's got hope, then you get massive political changes or revolutions, and things can get out of control. Now, we're not alone in where we are. So a couple of extreme examples is obviously north of us, Zimbabwe. They're into 3-digit inflation. That's running out of control. We fortunately nowhere near that. If we look east to Sri Lanka's got they don't have resources of their own, coal, oil, refining, so they're buying everything. And they just don't have the money to bring in fuel, which has brought the country to a standstill, which has caused political instability. And then in between that, we've got other issues going on. Ecuador, political instability multiplied by economic problems equals some form of revolution, which is on the cards there. So a couple of things that we can't change is the politicians. Mr. Ramaphosa seemed to have a handle on things, but this most recent revelations regarding his private dealings may be problematic. And the big concern is that some of the officials who are facing criminal charges politically, if things swing around, may they no longer be charged and become leaders again. So those are all big issues that we worry about, and there's not too much we can do by ourselves. But what I'm proposing and suggesting, and what I do with all my clients, is where, for example, you've got a business and things are fine, and all of a sudden a union comes in. The first thing I ask the question is, what happened? So unions, you can provide a very good function, but the question is, what's happened and what caused the staff to be feeling insecure that they needed a union to come in? And then we try and get to that problem. And the easiest way to fix it is, in the beginning, is a daily talk for 10 minutes on any issues, any problems. And slowly that talk develops into more, to real issues, real concerns. And those talks develop further into building a bit of trust. And then the real problems and discussions happen. And you can't resolve everything, but you can certainly start building a relationship, which is missing in many workplaces. Those businesses that have good relationships have far fewer disputes than those that don't. So sitting back over the last, I would say the last 2 years, I've certainly moved and got my clients to move away from simply retrenching and having that as a knee-jerk reaction, and sit down, whether it's a union or whether it's the staff, and seeing, well, what can we do? What can we work with? Can we look at alternatives that might be involve a 4-day working week, for example, where we look to have staff who work, let's say Monday to Thursday, and then the one day off. It does mean your pay goes down by that percent, but you're still in employment. And what we sometimes look to do, especially with public transport going up 12.5%, we try and take the sting out of that by a very small contribution there. So what that allows allows us to retain our workforce, allows us to still have perhaps 95% productivity without retrenching. You've got above that, obviously, short time that you could look at where possible. One of the big concerns I've had is obviously all admin staff who have the ability to work from home, raising concerns. And this is I picked up in the last 2 months repeatedly from clients saying, look, it's prohibitive to travel because of the cost of petrol. And as a result, what can we do? And in many instances, what we've done is gone back to working from home, and where possible. So I've had in business parks where we've got 3 different companies that are working next to each other, and they've all got a bookkeeper, they've all got a receptionist, and where we can is try and reduce the space that's taken, so getting a smaller commercial space, have some of those staff work from home, but not only service their business, but service all the businesses. Now, there's obviously a cost saving in not having to travel, et cetera, et cetera. So the banks, when I talk to them, they are very concerned about commercial property because they see lots of employers looking to reduce the footprint in terms of head offices, regional offices, admin centers. Obviously, factories stay the same, but becoming leaner there and using their staff more efficiently. And as a result, if you work from home, you end up saving a massive amount in fuel. Now, that's not possible with every workplace. The other issue that comes about is on outsourcing various functions. Now, once again, we don't want staff to be lost. So what we try and do is get as many staff into those outsourcing arrangements, which then service the business and other businesses. Now, saying all of that, there is obviously a ramping up immigration rate happening, and that's creating space in businesses. There is obviously, we had COVID. There was a number of people who passed away, and that created spaces. So there is a certain level of attrition that's happening. In many instances, those aren't being filled. So those are the preliminary ones that we look at. Now, we then don't just leave it at that. We then go and then meet with the staff and say to the staff, and I've done it because there's often a belief that the business has a safe full of gold and there's lots of money, and the business is just being selfish and not sharing it with the staff. And as you'll know, many businesses are highly leveraged. They've got serious overdrafts, which are now under pressure as the rates increase. So for me, the trick where I've started to get this right is to then sit down and talk through exactly with staff what the problems are, what problems we face, and ways forward. And whether it's any one of those options that I've spoken about, I've been amazed where solutions have come about. So where somebody wishes to retire early, or I've got a client who had 18 sites through South Africa, a big client, by reducing 2 of those sites, by letting the lease lapse, and moving those staff into other sites or to work from home. We saved ourselves, it's around 2 million rand a month, which is 24 million rand in a year, which is a massive saving. And a commitment there. I've got a client who's committed to no retrenchments. So in essence, what we're saying is, let's not just look at staff and make them pay for the bad situations. Are there other alternatives? Before I continue, I just wanted to give an opportunity for if there's specific queries or questions or suggestions that you want to raise with me while we're at this point, perhaps even sharing your experiences or your worries or concerns. Can just pop it on the chat if you do. If you don't, then no problem. All right. Well, let's. There's no queries there, so let's just then move on to the second part of what I wanted to talk about, and that is the one of the issues that I notice when I go to many workplaces is. And as I say, I do the full gamut of the employment. So whether it's dismissals, performance, retrenchments, all the way through to occupational health and safety. And then I've also got a commercial practice, drafting commercial agreements and litigating. But in all of those, I keep my eyes open and my ears open and listen to my clients as to what's going on. And everyone is obviously keeping an eye on the inflation rate. and the concerns that their staff are raising, and everyone is in the same boat at the moment. And whether the government is going to provide interventions, who knows? I don't think so. Notwithstanding SARS having record collections, so I think business is on its own for the meantime. So another area that I've seen before you rush into retrenchments is we sit down, we look at productivity, we look at the service delivery, and we have a careful look, or my clients have a careful look as to how do we boost that productivity? What is it with our staff that we can do better? Now, I can tell you as a labor lawyer, most of the time where there's issues with staff, it's misconduct. That's sort of 90% of the time, and very rarely is incapacity. And if it is incapacity, it's usually related to illness and not anything performance related. And I think it's just because performance in and of itself is difficult. It takes time, and it's a difficult talk to have. So all of us don't like direct talk. If you've been to one of my talks in the past, you may have heard me say this. But I mean, I've listened to educational psychologists talk about interesting things. How, for example, the reason a bar. So if you go to a pub or a bar and you sit down at the bar, traditionally it was designed for men, because men don't like sitting across the table looking at each other in their eyes and talking about their worries or concerns, but they're quite comfortable to sit shoulder to shoulder and talk. And I think there is something for that, because when I pick up my kids, my daughter, while I'm driving, she'll keep pulling my face toward her so she can see that I'm listening to her and talking to me. Whereas my son, he wants to sit in the back, and then he'll talk fine. But if I try and turn to him and talk, he's not keen. So the communication that we're building is a true one, where we're looking to build up a relationship with our staff, and to have direct discussions. So none of us like direct discussions, very uncomfortable. And I've noticed, funny enough, with younger employees, including younger employees that we employ in our law firm, they much prefer send an email, send a WhatsApp, than sitting down and chatting across the table. Because that's just how communication is. But all of us, our lives, we don't like being direct, because we know it's uncomfortable and it leads to conflicts. But conflict's not bad. I like conflict because it shows you what the problem is under the water. Let's pull it out and then let's deal with it. So with performance, we look at a business and you can see, well, what's going on. We've got X as our customers, and I appreciate there's a drop during a recession like we are now. However, how do we make what we're doing more efficient? And bearing in mind that employees play arguably the biggest role in that, how do we get more productivity? And that comes down to pressure on managers and supervisors to manage and supervise better. And once again, I found the best managers and supervisors are those who've got a high EQ, those who are prepared to listen and talk and solve problems, as opposed, and the easiest thing for me is I often ask, in your team, so if it's a high-performing team, I can guarantee the supervisor or manager will know everyone in the team, know their relationships, know what's going on. Whereas a poor-performing team, generally the supervisor and or manager is disconnected from the team and doesn't really know the individuals in the team. So I spend huge amounts of time communicating not only what's going on, including here's today's newspaper, 6.5% inflation rate, and it's getting better. And it's getting worse. So yesterday I was involved in a wage negotiation, and we're in a comfortable situation where we're going to settle on wages at least 2 or 3% less than inflation. Just the money's not there. But that's not just pulled out of the air. We've spent time talking to the union and the staff and saying, look, this is where we are. Here are the financials. If you've got questions, talk to us. So by the time we got to the wage negotiation, everyone understood it's not a tactic to make money, save money. There's a real problem that we've got. And what we're saying is staff, hold our hands and let's all walk together through this. and we're going to do the best we can to avoid retrenchments or restructuring. So that's the part of the talk, very important. But the other part is that there's a big part of the business where you your supervisors and managers aren't doing what they should do. Definition of management is getting things done via employees, by people, and we don't actually do that. We're so busy in our lives, and that's made worse by our electronic devices, by emails. I'm often in a meeting, so right now while I'm talking to you, there'll be emails coming in, and there'll be WhatsApps after 15 minutes just confirming that an email's been sent. So the pace we run at is incredible. And if I then rather return those emails and as opposed to talking to a staff member who's not performing, ultimately I'm doing myself down. Now, those performance discussions, you've got to have a very clear idea of what it is that you want from your staff, how they should be performing. And I'm surprised many businesses don't have a method of measuring. Now, the smaller the business, the more informal the measurement might be. But it could be simply I was listening to a small retailer, I think they've got 5 or 6 stores. But simply one of their focuses that we've been working on is they advertise, they've got a little bit of newspaper ads, they got some SEO on Google, but ultimately they rely on passing trade. And what we've been focusing on is from a service point of view, is when we get people in the store, that's the easy part, it seems. But when they leave the store and don't buy, why is that? And that's what we've been trying to get. So the first thing we had to do was measure how many people going in and out the store. And then we put that against how many transactions we had. And now simply from a performance and a service level, is there's somebody who then when someone comes in, just talks to them, how can I help you, friendly, and walks them through the store to find what they want. Because sometimes you're busy, you come, you think you can't see what you want and you leave. Now, we've done that in an attempt to make sure that we boost, and it has boosted our sales. So what I'm really saying is get back to the basics, get back to where we should be, and that is running businesses efficiently and properly. They don't run themselves. They take an enormous amount of effort to get right. Now, if you optimize your business in a difficult trading circumstance, you generally can avoid retrenchments. I appreciate, and some of my clients have said to me, "Gee, Bruce, we're not a charity. We employment." And my response is, "You're 100% correct. You're not a charity, but at the same time, you need to measure and manage your staff. You need to get your supervisors and managers. You may have to manage them to do their job properly as well, but we need to optimize all of that." So a good example is before you start using solar energy, for example, on a house, you've got to optimize the house. You've got to make sure you've got the bulbs that use the least energy, that the house is insulated. So when you start using that solar energy, it's optimized. And it's the same with the business. Before you start retrenching people, you've got to make sure you're running at 110% of your capacity. Saying that there are a number of schemes that are available via the DTI, especially for youth, for first-time employees. Depending on what industry you're in, it's worthwhile checking those to see if there's some assistance that you can get from government. As although they're all this doom and gloom with government, there are parts, including DTI, that are quite good and have programs in place. So I came across the one the other day. It's Department of Tourism in the hotel and tourism sector are providing a subsidy for those businesses that bring in young employees, et cetera, et cetera. So there are those out there. Now, one of the issues that I also see is besides businesses. So after the riots last year, I had a number of my clients that packed up business and didn't go back in just because they've been battling for a long time and they've had enough. Some of them now, subsequently a year later, have come back in, and obviously some haven't. So there's lots and lots of talk about moving production outside of South Africa, becoming a wholesaler rather than a manufacturer. And obviously, as a country, we want as many jobs as possible, and we don't want to push items out. But saying that, one thing I've noticed, being lucky in having a foot between South Africa and the UK, and the move the UK is not professional. It was just we decided to send kids for study this side. Is the fact that there are markets out there, and I've noticed, and I've guided some of my clients post-Brexit, there's some amazing trade deals that have been put in place with countries where you no longer have to go to the EU to get to a market in the UK. And certainly that's worthwhile looking at. And I've got a lot of clients looking at expanding markets there. I've had a lot of clients also who've looked at where well, specifically to get products in and sold, because the cost of manufacturing is very high in the UK, for example, and the same as Europe. But getting products there and from there into other countries. So there's a big Pacific trade deal which deals with a lot of countries such as Indonesia, who ultimately Britain does business with. So I've had a client who's now doing business with Britain, with a company in Britain, who then sells onto a country in Indonesia and makes good money. So there are all these other options out there where I didn't realize that we in a way we just see South Africa, but there are opportunities and things going on in other countries. So I've got some clients who've put some good deals together with companies in India, for example. And those are working quite well. So those are options as well, is to look outside your box and see, well, what else is there, and is there a way of insulating myself from the problems of South Africa until that comes right. And all of those initiatives. And years ago, a businessman told me, when times are tough, don't cut your sales force, double your sales force, and try and, although it's like you're sailing in a boat, there's only a little bit of wind there. Get as much wind into the boat by putting up the biggest sail you can, and that's obviously with your sales force. So what I found is if the problem, you let the problems get on top of you, you sink lower and lower, and eventually you do retrench and business gets hard. But to rise to the challenge and say, right, I'm going to dedicate someone in the business who must now get onto one of these online tender bulletins, and you pay a bit of money. They're the international ones, and it'll give you astounding things. I've sent something to a client of mine. They're in the textile industry, and they specialize in t-shirts. And something caught my eye, and I sent them to them, and it was something like 30,000 t-shirts that were needed in Eastern Europe somewhere. So there's all these things going on in South Africa. We think that we're not allowed to play in that space, but we're allowed to. So in essence, what I'm saying there is, as the going gets tougher and tougher, we've got to get tougher and tougher ourselves, and look at other opportunities and move in that direction to try and ensure that we get our businesses to survive. And to some extent, we're going to carry staff and run at not full profitability. We may be even breaking even, but there is some responsibility as employers to try and keep as many people as possible to get us through where we are, because we can't slip from 50 to 60 to 70 to 80% unemployment, because I don't know what will be left there. So yeah, we're in a difficult time, a hard time, but it's a time where you communicate. You'll be amazed at the response that you get from staff. So those are the points that I wanted to raise. The way that I work, is I'll make my details available. You're very welcome to email, phone me, and have a chat. There's no charge. on that. If you want some ideas or suggestions, I'm happy to share things, because we are in a difficult time, and I'm very happy to make time available on any legal issue. You're very welcome to make use of that. I'll just open up the floor again for anyone who's got specific questions or queries. I'm happy to deal with those. All right. I don't see any hands up or any specific queries, but certainly I'll make my details available, and you're very welcome to privately to phone me or email me, and let me see if I can assist in any manner. So thank you very much for attending this morning. So I do have a query here from Corin. What are your views on performance appraisals? Performance appraisals done on an annual, a biannual, or on a quarterly basis, I find too far apart, because by then you really, it's a box ticking exercise. You can't think of examples. I much prefer to have supervisors giving feedback on a much regular basis. And this sounds quite simple, but I often find simple things work best. Is that at all time, if I'm a manager, I want my supervisors to class employees into 3 groups. So those are non-performers, those are performers, and those are super performers. And what I say to the managers and supervisors is non-performers need to become performers, and performers must become super performers. And the way to do that is, if you're on top of things, you will know at all times who falls into that. And then on a weekly basis, all the manager is wanting to know is, right, have you moved any of your non-performers to performers, and performers to super performers? If you haven't, then you're not doing your job. If possible, we want to avoid firing our non-performers, but you need to have that difficult discussion. You're not performing in A, B, and C areas. What's going on? How can we help you? And keep at it. Rather than not having the difficult discussion, leaving the person there, and then 3 to 4 times a year having a performance appraisal where you can't give examples. So yeah, my view is an active weekly short update on those 3 areas. You can then couple that, you can then summarize that once a month into a simple report. But that is the challenge. Corin, I hope that helps you. What are your thoughts on the NPO sector? That's Marshall Naidu. The amount of money available for NPOs is obviously suffering, and there's big pressure and big competition for those for that money. Now, what I've done, there's 1 or 2 NPOs that I look after. We've had to make the difficult decision, because a lot of funders, especially international funders, they want to see how many rand, how many cents in the rand, or cents in the dollar, or pence in the pound is ending up in the pockets of the ultimate beneficiary. Now, there's a report with a scale that's produced, and the most successful NPO in the world is a Ugandan agricultural NPO that provides money to rural women who are looking for seed capital to assist and expand their farming. And they run, I think it's something like 88 cents to the dollar get into their hands. So what happens in times like this is that you then start to, if you don't retrench your staff, you start ending having less and less to the beneficiaries. The first thing I've suggested to my clients before we cut, once again, and this is extraordinary, 3 years ago, I wouldn't be telling you this, but from a political point of view, we can't afford large-scale unemployment. And I appreciate you not a charity, but in terms of the NPO, the first thing I do is go to the funder and say to the funder, look, this is the story. This is where we are. This is where we're battling. We're trying to avoid retrenching. What can we do? Now, the big funders, the first thing they're going to ask is, because they also don't like retrenchments, can you reduce your footprint? Can you reduce the number of vehicles? What can you do from a capital expenditure point of view to free some money up? If you're fortunate, they're then prepared to increase their spend. But as I say, I've noticed, I was reading an article with the amount of money going into to assist Ukrainians. So you're looking at, I think there's 38 million Ukrainians still in Ukraine. It's about 6 million who's out. And the amount of funds from big funders that have gone into that has now caused other international charities and projects to suffer. So Marshni, that's what I would do. Make yourself as lean as possible without retrenching, and then talk to your funder, say what you've done, and see if you can avoid. If not, then talk about a 4-day, 3-day week, working from home. Whatever you can to reduce the exposure. Just on that point, interestingly, there's some industries, call centers, insurance industries, where you've got large amounts of people who on telephones and computers who can work from home. So I know whole call centers that have moved from buildings to save cost to go home. One of the interesting things that's come out is a debate, and I think that debate won't go ahead now, but it will in the future, is what the employer will pay towards the employee working from home. Will there be a working at home allowance? Some of the debates I've seen have been simply, well, you can work at home, you don't have to travel, and ultimately, instead of cutting your salary, then let's just stay what we are. But that raises a whole bunch of issues, health and safety. I've had an injury at home, which we're now processing through COIDA as to whether or not that was the workplace or whatever. So it does introduce a whole bunch of new issues. All right, so yeah, those are the two questions that we had there. Pleasure, Marshni. So that's that. I'll ask Chidi or Candice just to send out my details. Feel free to give me a call. And as I say, I've got huge sympathy for where we are in South Africa. I think we're in a really difficult time, and that's why I'm happy to share my time for free to see if there are things that can be put in place. And bear in mind, I spend all day cracking my head trying to work out ways of keeping business going, keeping employees in employment. And fortunately, a lot of my clients are like-minded and see that it'd be very easy to retrench 40% of the workforce and we go back to the profitability. But fortunately, we're not alone. The whole world is in the same bucket. So there is some sympathy. And all right. So good to meet you all virtually. Thanks so much for attending. And that's the end of the session. And I hope some of you take that opportunity and enjoy your Wednesday. Thank you. Bye.